and fun and comfortable and growing is descriptors that the team came up with, each individually. But again, where you see those larger print words, those were really consistent. That meant more than one, and sometimes many more than one individuals cited those as a part of their own personal vision for the community. Next slide. We did kind of a classic exercise of strategic planning called a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And again, this is a little bit of an eye chart here, and so I don't want to read it to you, but this is really while we did the visioning to sort of focus on where we want to take the community, this was really a close look at the organization itself and what we needed. What did we do well? What do we currently do well? Where do we need to get better? What things in the external environment worry us that could threaten us, and we need to think about how we adapt and mitigate those threats. And then if all of those things are true, what are at least some of the opportunities that await us? And so those you see in the upper right quadrant in the little starburst things, and these I'll read back to you if I can see them. So internal operational improvement. We can be a better organization. We can do a better job in our investments in our capital. That relates to the infrastructure issue. We need to do a better job and have real opportunities to build strong partnerships with the community. Some of those organizational relationships that Chris alluded to in the community feedback, but generally a theme of we've got an opportunity to do a better job in the partnership area. There was a recognition that you, the board of aldermen, represented an opportunity in terms of the kind of shift that's that's happened with the makeup of the board, with a young and newer council member bringing fresh ideas, and how do we as an organization together take advantage of that? There's an opportunity to attract new business. There's opportunities in downtown. There's opportunities to do a much better job of telling our own story rather than letting others tell it for us. We have an opportunity to build our workforce, to train and develop that workforce, and we can continue to grow in a strategic way. So that was a really important part of what we talked about, is thinking about what we're good at, what we're not so good at, and what scares us. Is that then what do we see as some of the real important opportunities for us to grab? Next slide. So we did, and you're going to see some photographs in a minute of what this exercise looked like, but it was some of you have probably been through these in your work or at school, but a sticky note exercise. And we used a big graphical template and asked all of the members working there together to reflect on the vision and reflect on the SWOT analysis, and then using little sticky notes, write down sort of very specific needs. That's the black text on here that they felt like, looking out into the future, the city needed to take. And there you can see they're of all different kinds of viewpoints and perspectives and level of detail. But that was the idea. We were really focusing on quantity of ideas, not necessarily quality. In other words, we advised everyone to say, look, we've got to enter this process and behave with an open mind. And so no one criticized these ideas. They all got a chance to talk about them and tell people why they thought they were important. And then I had them literally reshuffle all of the sticky notes into clusters that represented some common themes or potentially goals. And that's what you see in the colored text. So one was to practice intentional communication and engagement. And you're going to see, I hope, the linkage between what we heard from the internal and the external focus group. We got to get better and being really intentional about how we engage the community and how we communicate and tell our story. We got to build community alliances. That's the partnership idea. That's an important strategic goal for us. We've got to do a better job of on the community leadership process, the governance process, in interestingly on thinking about how you use your authority to appoint people to committees, boards, commissions, and outreach recruitment of folks to get involved in the city, and also to do a better job. The staff is telling itself we need to do a better job of helping the council understand what it is we do, the details of the operations of the city. You can see advanced human capital was all about the city's workforce. You know, how can we make sure that we can evaluate people well, that we get employees to buy into our mission and vision, that our leaders are held accountable, and so forth. A fourth one was continuous improvement. That's what we called earlier on, Chris alluded to, as operational excellence. How do we operate more efficiently as a city? Infrastructure investments, a big theme we heard in the outreach, is an important goal. And then inclusive and supportive culture. So that's about the organizational culture, and in terms of making sure that we're engaging and being inclusive with our employees, building a robust DEI plan, working to eliminate any negativity in our culture over time. So those were the big ideas that came out of this. Next slide, Chris. So we started looking at that list, and this was getting fairly close to the end of the day. And you say, you know what? Most, not all, but most of what we talked about during our full day together, what we could really look at as being as much about the organizational needs and less about the community priorities. And so we started to talk about that and concluded that the strategic plan, as we develop it, really needs to be written in such a way that we acknowledge the importance of both of those. And so we invented some new terms, and these are still a work in progress. But we said that what the sticky note exercise told us was that our priorities as an organization are around stewardship of our resources, around nurturing and growing and strengthening our human capital. It's about building the kind of culture that we want to have, an inclusive, diverse culture within the organization, and this continuous improvement idea, the always getting better and always be more efficient. On the community side, they said, here are the kinds of things that we believe that we were hearing from that outreach. And we also went back and took a look at the 2018 version of the strategic plan to see what kind of persistent ideas that were relevant then might still be persistent today. And again, we came up with 4 broad categories. The community wants us to elevate the quality of life in Sheboygan, and that has to do with revitalized neighborhoods. That's where housing fits. We need to leverage and improve and expand our parks and open space, an important part of our community identity, and potentially also an economic development asset. We talked about the development of third spaces. This had to do with new kinds of venues, dining, entertainment, those kinds of things, and then strengthening our parks and leisure services, recreation kinds of things, all of those being sort of a subset of what is quality of life. You said the community expects us to have a robust infrastructure, both in terms of the traditional infrastructure like streets and utilities, but also facilities. We want to think about our growth to make sure that we're growing in a sustainable, strategic way. And then again, the community expects us to build a sense of belonging among the people and the businesses of the community, and building and strengthening alliances. So this is what we ended the day with as these really kind of 8 priorities, half of which are focused on the organization and half of which on the community. So next, Chris. So, well, let me back up for a second. So what next after those goals and objectives? And we alluded to this early on. Well, we now have to build out sort of the understructure of that. What specific things in the way of supporting objectives and action items need to be taken in order to drive that vision and to accomplish those big picture goals? The next few slides that would just page through kind of quickly are just to give you sort of a sense of a feel of what this workshop looked like. We did it, I think, as I mentioned, at the marina. There's Chris leading the SWOT analysis, and our other colleague who is with us. This is where we're really talking, and there was some kind of spirited dialogue about what we're good at and maybe not what we're good at, and having people sort of clarify that. You can see here that we had lots of different ideas about that, and we ultimately sort of shifted these things around to make sure that we had them right, that the strengths were right and the weaknesses were right, and so forth. And Chris apparently enjoyed doing it. So
that's how everybody was feeling at the end of the day. It was all happy and everything.
So that's the overview of where we are, and Chris will kind of wrap us up here. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh no, Dave, I don't have anything else to add. That was we've enjoyed working with you guys up to this point, and continue to look forward to kind of defining everything and fine tuning this.
We're happy to answer questions, any feedback or questions. We want you as the policymakers to really have a sense of where we're going directionally, and to make sure that we're not missing things that you consider really important before we spend additional time sort of building out that framework if the framework isn't pretty close to right. So we're looking for your feedback at this point.
All righty, well, we'll start taking questions. I see Barb's got on the queue right away, so I'll put her right up there. Barb?
Thank you so much. This was very interesting, and of course, it piqued my interest on having a hard copy of this. Are we going to get one of those so that we can look it over and, maybe do some strategic planning for it?
Is that directed to us or to the staff on the distribution?
Chad's got his hand open, so we're going to let him answer that.
Thank you.
So we can forward this presentation digitally, and if you need a copy printed, I'd be happy to print a copy of it after this presentation. Whatever would help with you guys analyzing kind of what's here so far.
Okay, I'm okay with the digital. Then it's on my computer. I can look at it whenever I want.
Okay, next up is Roberta.
Thank you. I was intrigued with the fact that staff had the ability that they were interviewed, and then they had the ability to cohese as a group and move priorities and think about priorities. The alders had the ability to do one-on-one. Will the alders likewise get an opportunity to cohese as a group with sticky notes, et cetera? Because I think our perspective is different than staff perspective. I expect that we'll end up with the same big chunks. So I don't think we need to reinvent chunks, but will we have that opportunity? Is that in the future?
So what I would say to that is it's very difficult to do that. It's going to have to be strategic because it needs to be a public meeting because we have a quorum of the council present. And I think that's why we went the route of trying to work with the department heads first to try to hone in on this a little bit. I guess if there's a way of being able to do this in a public setting with a agenda posted and meeting open meeting laws, I mean, it's something we could look at, but I know that we've struggled in the past with the quorum issues, and I don't know if Chuck Adams has any further thoughts on that, not to put them on the spot, but that's kind of the challenge, I think, is the open meeting requirements.
Chuck, you want to answer that?
Well, it would have to be in a public meeting, but that's, I mean, anytime you meet, it's in a public meeting. So I don't necessarily see that as a big barrier. You would post the meeting and you would do things in public. That doesn't mean that you have to give the public the opportunity to speak, just in the same way as you do a public forum, you can limit it. And you would just do the same thing. It's just that you might have an audience,
Okay.
as you should.
Thank you.
Gracia.
Yes, would that be possible to bring up the presentation again?
Sure. Chris, can you share that again? Do you have a particular slide you want us to go to?
Unfortunately, I didn't note down which slide that was.
Okay. Topic, do you remember?
Yes, so the question I have, and maybe then you will be fine, you will be able to identify the subject, is some of the statements that you took note of are slightly obscure to me, at least 3 or 4 of them, and I wonder if you gave us the extreme synthesis of what you heard, but you have more content to those statements, or those statements are just the way you receive them and you would not be able to expand on those. For example, there was, I believe there was one slide where there were 2 or 3 statements where that I just cannot relate. I don't know what they mean. And one of them refers to the negative cultures. So would you be able to add some more understanding of that statement that you got during the interview or work, or is just the statement itself?
Let me take a swing at that, and then maybe either Chad or Todd might want to weigh in on that. What you are seeing in all of those slides from the community engagement process is our attempt to distill into very few words, which was an extensive amount of input and data, and there is additional detail that would flesh those concepts out, and so that was just our attempt to figure out a way to summarize the results thematically, and not to put in this slide presentation all of the detail that we have, but there is significant detail behind all of that.
So you would be able to expand on some of these for us to understand it better?
Yes, we certainly could do that. We spent a good bit of time, and I should have mentioned this when we met with the staff at the marina in going over some of that more granular detail that we had, and trying to get real clarity, and they asked really good questions about that data. So again, it does exist.
When would that be a good time to have that understanding?
Okay, go ahead. Chad's got something. Go ahead.
So for the purpose of this discussion, David and Chris, can you go to the slide that's got the multicolored headings and then the black underneath it with multiple things on it? That's the one where it references, I think, the concerns of Alder Perella. Yes. That the bottom on this slide is where it says work to eliminate negative cultures. Is this the slide you're referring to?
Yes.
So I think what and David is, answering it. So I think it's a cumulation of everything that they've seen to date and heard, and put into these, and then these working strategic goals and objectives. Correct me if I'm wrong, David, but this is really taking that information that you presented in all the engagement and working with the staff and coming up with some buckets to try to put this stuff in. Is that correct?
Yes, and thank you, Chad, for recognizing that this was the particular slide that the alderperson was looking at. So the extensive amount of detail that I was talking about a minute ago was related to what we learned in that engagement process, both the internal interviews and in the focus groups and in the online questionnaire. This material that you're looking at right now came from that sticky note exercise. And so this, I do recall some of this, just how it sort of unfolded in the workshop. There were several members of the management team that in, talking about what kinds of things do we need to be better at is strengthening our culture and recognizing that there might well be pockets within the city organization that could use some strengthening and some positive movement in the culture. So the detail behind that is not as voluminous as the community engagement. It's on a series of literally Post-it notes that we then we use to summarize and characterize what those notes meant. Again, I hope that answers your question, because I answered a different question now than you asked.
Go ahead, Grazia.
So you did actually, thank you. And so that slide then, if I understand it correctly, is a combination of the internal sticky notes exercise and everything else, right? So would you remember?
Yes. I'm sorry, I stepped on you. Please finish your thought. I'm sorry.
Would you also, I'm just curious, know the always be truthful, I believe, to ourselves? I don't have the slide right now. Where does that come from? Always stay true to ourselves. It's another one which is kind of vague, and so I am trying to understand the content, the substance of it. Always stay true to ourselves.
Yes, right there up there at the top. I'll have to be honest with you, Alderperson. I don't have a particular recollection of exactly where that one came from and what it represents, other than it related to culture. And I think it had to do with being public servants and being proud of being public servants and making sure that we do the things that we know to be right. At least that's how I would interpret it. And if any on the staff want to correct me on that, that'd be fine. But that's certainly how I read it.
Chief Domagowski has something to add to it.
Sure, I recall the discussion being, we were talking about many different things, but some of them, what were other cities doing? What direction should we move in? And one of the thoughts that was brought up is that we have to remain true to what Sheboygan is too, and not necessarily try to change the strengths of what our community already offers.
Thank you both.
Okay. All righty. I guess Berta's got comments here.
Thank you. The slide that was just up was fairly meaty, and I could relate to that. But then we got to the end, and we had a slide that had organizational priorities and community priorities, and I didn't see very much of a bridge between the slide that we just saw and the organizational priorities: stewardship, human capital, inclusive culture, continuous improvement. You can open any business book and you can see those 4 things in it. So how did you arrive at that?
Okay, so part of that, and this is still a work in progress, and so the wordsmithing isn't necessarily complete, but it was, as I attempted to convey, a recognition that there was something incomplete in everyone's mind on that multicolored slide, that it did not describe in a comprehensive enough way where all of our priorities are, and that just as a part of the process, or any number of reasons, who knows, we've stepped back from that group of sticky notes and asked the question, is this complete? And the answer was no, it wasn't complete. The answer is that we talked more about the organization and our priorities as, you know, leaders within the organization, which you would expect, and less about, not completely absent, but less about what we need to do as an organization to address the priorities of the community. So that's when we just made the recommendation to the group that what we ought to do is in effect bifurcate those ideas and say our strategic plan will address both the needs of the organization, the strategic needs of the organization, and the strategic needs of the community, and that those words that are there, we just sort of brainstormed them on the spot, just to capture the idea of we've got to address both and not just one. So there's some crossover. If you look at the multicolored slide, you'll see, for example, infrastructure is on there. I think that's one that sort of found its way to the community side rather than the organizational side. So it's not completely true that everything on that multicolored slide was only internally focused, but it was more heavily weighted that way. I'm sorry I talked so long, but that was the way it unfolded.
Follow up on that?
Thank you. And the thing that I see that dropped off was communications and engagement. That doesn't show up anywhere in organizational priorities or community priorities, but it was one of the 7 or 8 on those colored places. So I guess my question is, have you lost something by trying to condense it so much?
That's a possibility, Alderperson, and we'll certainly go back, make a note of that and go back. I can tell you with real confidence, because of exactly what you're noticing, is that improvement of communication and engagement will be prominent within the plan. Sort of the art of doing these plans, it's more art than science. Maybe it's a craft, is making sure that you find the right level for each idea. So some ideas rise to the level of a strategic goal, which is going to be something that's very durable and persistent. And at the opposite end, there are certain things that are really tasks that you might finish in the course of a year or two. So we've got all of those ideas within, I'll use your great word for it, various buckets, and it'll all be there in the plan. But we'll take, and don't let me put words in your mouth, we'll take from your comment that you would like to see that communication and engagement rise to the level of one of those 8 or 9, like you said, there's no magic number there, top level goals. Is that a fair recap?
Well, sure, but that's my observation was a little broader than that. I just want to have captured all the richness of all of the input, and it just felt like after all the sticky notes and everything, and you came up with organizational and community priorities, that it got sanitized, and I don't want it to get sanitized. And I do understand that you need to focus so that you can actually build a strategic plan. I don't have any problem with that. So I guess maybe go back and craft some words and make them richer than a business book index.
Okay, all right. Thank you. That's exactly the kind of feedback we're looking for, and we appreciate it.
Okay. Anyone else have? I guess that's it. Any other comments from anyone? Okay. And Chad, you want to have a little bit of follow-up with this at all, Chad, or is this pretty much?
I guess, and I'm gonna throw Todd and the mayor on the, is it the wish of this group to spend multiple hours trying to go through an exercise similar to what the department heads went through? And I'm not sure if it's in the evening or it's a Saturday or a Sunday, to try to engage in, or do you want to get, you want us to, I'll tomorrow morning send you this slide deck, and if there's anything else that comes to mind, you share that with staff and we share it with the consultant. So I guess the question is, what is the feel of the committee of the whole from, this point forward? What we had in the plan was that, we would take any input that anybody has and let you have some time to digest it and give some additional input if needed. Have another committee of the whole meeting if that's what it takes, or just share that with staff, and then we'll, take it to the next step and try to get a little bit more detail on the strategic goals and some of the priorities and next steps related to laying that out, and then come back and have dialogue related to that. I guess where we're at is we didn't want to spend a ton of time putting a lot of detail into all of this stuff if the council wasn't on board with this high level stuff. So that's why we thought it was a good point to come at this time and share what's been received to date. So I guess we need some direction from this body as to where you would like us to go from here.
Okay, well, then I'm going to send it right to Todd then, and let's see his comments.
Thank you, Chair. This was to bring the information together. This is the second, official strategic plan, so it's very difficult. There's a lot of data. I guess my suggestion to the council would be that we do a committee of the whole, and we can kind of get the alders to kind of participate, kind of like the department heads did, and maybe take that information and review it as a group to get that involvement. It's a lot of data, it's a lot of work, but we need input from the council on what steps you'd like us to take next.
Okay. Mayor?
Thank you, Chairman. And obviously, only a few folks have spoke, but I think it's just, it might be helpful to go down the line really quick just to get a good sense of what everyone is thinking. I mean, this is the strategic plan for the next few years, not only for the city as an organization, but the city as a leader in the 50,000 individuals that we represent. So when we get a kick at the can, we got to make sure that we're kicking the can and doing it right. For all the different components, communications, operations, how we're spending our money, how we're fixing the roads, how we're making our community safe, parks, this is the big, big picture. So we got to do it right. So, we don't, I know I brought this up during the process, at what point do we bring in the council? Because I get the general sense that as elected officials, you want to, have a kick at the can and a say through your 2 cents in the process. Because, at the end of the day, you're the folks that, well, I do too, but you're the folks that get the constituent calls, about, oh, what are you doing? Well, you're spending this money. What's this project for? And how do all these puzzle pieces fit together? It doesn't necessarily have to be, a full day strategic planning session, unless you want that. I know I'm busy, but it could be a condensed version, 2 hours.
Kind of a Reader's Digest.
Committee of the whole is the platform to do this stuff. I always say it's the casual common council, so we can have more open conversations until you give the mayor the mic and then you just blah, 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 blah. So I'll stop. But that's just my 2 cents. We want your input. We want your advice. If we're going in the right direction, what are we missing? How we can finer tune the engine, and just make our community a better place. This is the opportunity to do it. So.
Okay, well then I'm going to follow the line, and Grazia is next one in line. Well, I'll get you in the queue. You'll be next. Okay, Grazia.
Yes, I do agree that we want to be active participants as a common council as much as possible. And that is also the reason that I think that we may need a little bit more, again, the word that comes to mind is expansion on some of the items that we have read tonight, learned about tonight. Because if the concepts are presented in, I understand the idea of the synthesis, but if the concepts are presented in a vague format, it's very hard to relate to those. And it's very hard to understand what is the need behind it. So that is what I think, again, I think, yes, we should be engaged as much as possible and also be provided a little bit more content behind the synthetic versions of the findings in order to relate to those better.
Okay, thanks, Grazia. Roberta, here's your chance.
Thank you very much. And this might be for our city attorney. It would be my wish that we convene, at the marina and do it like on a Saturday morning for 3 hours max, because this is a fairly constrained space in order to do that. So is it legit that we could post a meeting and say it's a strategic planning meeting and hold it elsewhere? Maybe the Mead Library, wherever.
As long as it's in the city, you're good.
Okay.
And it's public. As
Okay.
long as the public can get there, you're good.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, Alderperson Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a couple comments on one theme that I've been hearing. The council being involved in this process is most certainly important, as our role is setting policy, and this is somewhat going to dictate the direction that policy is going for the next half decade or so. But one thing, looking back to the SWOT analysis session, if we had city staff doing that and spending what looked like a good amount of time, they're here more often than we are. They're the ones that are working in the building every day, and I just want to make sure that we take into consideration that the opinion of city staff shouldn't just be set over to the side if we do a planning session ourselves, because that's giving us real insights into what the people leading and working in all the departments believe changes, or I guess the general direction needs to be for them to be the most successful. So I would caution us against duplicating anything that's already been done unless we already have a plan on how we are going to integrate the outcome of the two of them.
Alrighty, well, I would agree with that, but I also think we should have like you said, a short session, like, a couple hours that we can go through some of the stuff, not putting aside staff, following through and looking at it, kind of looking at it under a microscope, and just taking a quick look and going through it all. Does anyone else have comments? Chad, go ahead.
I guess I just have a question for David and Chris, given that you guys do a lot of this community engagement across the nation. Do you have thoughts on a means of doing this, maybe electronically or some other means of doing it through some type of engagement type software or something where, people wouldn't have to necessarily come together, but could still put their input on some of the stuff that's been shared? Or I guess there's people shaking their head, they don't want that. So don't worry about that.
Oh, Director Beeble. There you go. Go ahead.
The department heads met, and if you looked at or heard tonight's presentation, a lot of the discussion focused on internal operations. At the end of the meeting, we did agree, and I agree, there needs to be that bridge between what is the external, the larger community needs, and how do we fix the internal and bridge that gap. So that's why I think when you saw most of the findings tonight, there was a lot of internal focused. The last time we did this, I really think, we really should talk collaboratively, council, staff, and you talk about being more inclusive and thinking together and listening to each other. What an opportunity let's focus now on the community aspects. From your perspective, we could also provide input in terms of what the internal challenges are and what we need and what the gap is. And that way, we are building at least a closer relationship in how we're going to advance the community.
Thank you, David. Barb, you had a comment?
Yep. I agree, and that was my thought on this. I would rather go with a meeting of the alders so we can discuss, where we're gonna head, because we are the ones that make that decision. And I'm never in favor of just a handful of people, leadership, making that decision without letting the other alders in on what's going on. Bert and I talk about that pretty often about, well, how do we get the other alder people in this so that they know what's going around? So I think I'd like to have a little get together, first a little time to absorb all that information, and then to get together and put your 2 cents worth in.
Okay, thanks, Barb. And I agree with that sentiment. Anyone else have any comments? Chad?
So let me ask you this question. Is the majority of the group by a head shake supportive of doing this on a Saturday morning? Or is this an evening after hours type of thing? Because that will help us trying to hone in with travel plans of the consultant, because David is in Texas. So when would you prefer to do this? What would work the best in everyone's schedule? An evening workshop or a Saturday workshop?
I'm open to, I guess I would prefer evening, but I would be open to Saturday myself. I don't know how else, do we have any?
What a doodle poll. Show of hands, who wants to do an evening? 3 choices, evening, Saturday, or no preference? Evening?
Evening.
Raise your hand.
Evening, raise your hand.
All right, 2, 3. Saturday?
Saturday?
1.
1.
No preference. All right. Well, I guess it's the evening because there was 3 versus 2.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, and if worse comes to worse, and if Saturday's the only option, then we'll go with Saturday, that's.
I would just say this, if I might, we will work with you in whatever form is the most useful and productive for you. And, and we will of course be there in person, and we'll do what it takes to make that happen if that's your decision.
David's excited to come visit Sheboygan again.
I am. I am.
Picking up surfing.
Alder Salazar has a question here.
Thank you, Chair. So we'll make sure to bring you some mud pies or some good bakery. But, okay, just to echo some comments that I've heard that I think are really important. I appreciate what Trey said about the SWOT analysis. I think that's important for us as alders to realize that the staff has done that, and I think that's important. I love doing a SWOT analysis, but I also want to be thoughtful and mindful of that the staff have done that. So I guess I would ask sort of Baker Tilly or Chad, whoever's sort of leading this, to really think about how the alders can engage and how we can sort of blend both discussions together. I appreciate David saying sort of having directors there and having this conversation about sort of focusing on the public, but I also want to make sure we're mindful of some of the internal operations, because that will also hit budget, and as alders we need to sort of think about that as well. So I know that's sort of a task at hand, but that's sort of my synopsis of sort of what we came out of today. So thank you.
Thank you. Bert?
All of the focus groups, the 7 or 9 or however many focus groups there were, those are our community. Those were very carefully chosen. They were representative of people in the community who were not staff, who are not elected officials, that's the meat of what we can do, because those are our constituents, and they came to us in various permutations of what they do every day in their lives. So that's the part that I would like to focus on. And then we correlate that with the city's focus on, we know day-to-day operations, and we've done this for years, and we know you do, and we appreciate what you do. It's those other constituents that we have to really grapple with.
All righty. Any other comments, suggestions? Okay. And it's seeing as the evening is late and there's no more questions, I guess we can leave the gentleman from Baker Tilly go, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion's made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Are you kidding?
Chair votes aye. That is adjourned. I just wanted to see, just for the.
Are you kidding?
Debbie's on standby. For the licensee of the public safety.